Now to do that, I go to my local repository entry inside the Git repositories view, go down to where it says remotes, right click and choose create remote. Now firstly it asks you for a name for the new remote repository. Now by default that name tends to be the word origin, and for what I'm going to be using this repository for, I'm going to stay with the default name of origin. I'm not going to change that. Also stay with the default configure push option and click OK. I now have to map that URI that I stored earlier into this entry. So if I click the change button, because I copied it into the clipboard, it's now automatically populated all the information I need into this panel. Now, first time through, you will have to type in your GitHub or Bitbucket user ID and password, which you can then get it to store inside Secure Store. So the next time it will bring it up automatically. Once you've got all the information entered, click on Finish. Now we have to create a link between the remote and local repositories. Now I can do that simply by clicking Add and entering the relevant information about what branch we need to examine from the local and what branch we're going to connect to in the remote. But I find that rather than use this, if I click on Advanced, it'll actually help me fill in those fields for me. So if I click on the drop down for source ref and choose the master branch, which is what we're using in our local repository, it will by default put it into the master in the remote, which is fine. I don't need to put it into anything other than master. Click on Add Spec and it adds that entry into the list here. I save the specifications and click Finish. Now you can do a dry run at this point where it will poll the remote repository to make sure you've got a viable connection, but I'm just going to click Save for now. So now you can see that it's added an entry into remotes for a repository, a remote repository which we've called Origin, and inside that it has two entries, one with a green downward facing arrow and one with a red upward facing arrow. These represent the ability to push projects to the remote or fetch projects out of the remote. Now for this, I want to push my project that I've stored inside this repository into my remote GitHub repository. So I choose the upward facing red arrow entry, right click and choose push. That is now pushing to that remote repository. It's finished, click close. And if I now go back to my GitHub repository that I created, click on refresh, and now you can see that I have successfully uploaded current version of my local Git repository to my remote Git repository. So if I return now to Workbench, if I wished, I could then do another change to my project. Say, for example, if I decide I don't want that check assertion to be 4, after all, change it to 3, save it. Again, it's flagging up that save is now available to be staged over inside my staging view. So I'll stage that over by clicking the double crosses. And in this case, once I put my message in, reset check value to 3. Rather than just do a commit to the local repository, I'm going to do a commit and push up to the remote repository. Click there. Again, it's committed it to the local, and it's now pushing that up to the remote. Click close, return to my remote repository, refresh again, and you can now see it's updated my remote repository with the version that I've updated. Now, up to this point, we've been dealing with a scenario whereby we've created a new TTT unit test and have placed it into both local and remote Git repositories. Now, what if the situation is that we actually want to work on a unit test which has already been staged to a remote Git repository? Either we haven't been working on it for a long time, or we've never worked on it, and we need to load it into Topaz Workbench. So to simulate this, what I'm going to do first is delete the local repository and the project from within my workbench, and then re-upload it from the remote GitHub repository. Now, if you want to delete a local repository, the best way of doing it is to make sure that you don't have any open files, or you're using any files, or if you've got any locks on any of the elements either inside the repository or in the project itself. The best way of doing that is to shut down Topaz Workbench. So we'll shut down Topaz Workbench, bring it back up again. So now I go to my local repository I created, right click, and go delete repository. I choose delete repository data and history, and I also choose to delete the working tree, which is this bit up here. Click OK. That's now deleted everything. Just as a final check, I'm just going to go into my directory, there's Git, and check that the repository directory for my project has gone, which it has. So now we've successfully deleted that project and that local repository. So I am now a developer who wants to pull in a particular project out of my Git repository, my GitHub repository. If I go into the remote Git repository I'm interested in, this one here, this is the project I'm interested in working on, although there are actually two projects stored here, ALJ Git demo and CWXT date demo. And it's this one here, the ALJ Cob one, that I want to work on. So in order to be able to import that in to my Topaz Workbench, the first thing I need, obviously, is the URI for this repository. So for GitHub, you can do the similar sort of process in Bitbucket. I click on where it says clone or download, and there's the URI, so I can simply copy it to my clipboard. I now return to my Topaz Workbench, and in my Project Explorer here, right click, import. From there, choose Git Projects from Git. Click Next. Where it says Clone URI, click Next. It's populated the details for you. So I'll click Next. Now, the element that I want to download is on the master branch. In fact, they're both on the master branch. So that's definitely where I want to get it from. Go to Next. This is where it's going to put it to. That's my default path for my local Git repositories, and there it's got the name there. Again, I'm going to go for the master branch again, and I'm going to stick with the default remote name of origin. Click Next. I'm going to import the existing project, or project in this case. Click Next. Now you can see it's listing all the projects available in master, but I'm only interested in ALJ Cob. So deselect the CWXT date one. Click Finish. Here now you can see that the ALJOCOB demo rep1 local repository has been created, and a tree in my Project Explorer has also been created for my ALJOCOB_git _demo project, which is the one I wanted to work on. Just to prove it does work, let's pull up the scenario. There we have the scenario. I'll run it. Choose the connection. Choose another JCL. We'll just run it like that. There you have it. The job works, so this is now a usable, downloaded version of the ALJOCOB Git demo TTT project. We've seen here how we can use the eGit plugin to manage Topaz for Total Test unit tests within both local and remote Git repositories.